Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast, brought to you by Marketing What's New. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. Today, we're going to talk about how to get everyone to see what your data is telling you. First, we have less than 3 months until Universal Analytics by Google goes away, so we've all got to get on to GA4. More on that later. Let's get to today's show. You've strategized and run a marketing program, and it's had positive results. You would think that you simply need to show leadership your data, and then you can sit back while they lavish you with praise. Not quite. Because it won't have that hope for impact if you haven't found the story that's at the core of the data. Maya Angelou said, people will forget what you said, forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that feeling always has to come through by building the arc of a story. And to find and tell those stories, you need business intelligence and data visualization tools. But I've got an expert for that. Our guest has spent the last decade building and managing these kind of business intelligence solutions, and she's passionate about helping users leverage data to solve problems. She holds an MBA and a bachelor's degree, and she has applied this knowledge in industries such as healthcare, media, travel, hospitality, and high tech. And she is currently working at Google as a technical lead, helping internal teams with their business intelligence and analytics strategy. And in early 2023, she came out with a book called Data Storytelling with Google Looker Studio. Let's go talk to Sireesha Pulipati. Really glad to welcome Sireesha Pulipati. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Glenn. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And we've got someone at the source of what we're going to talk about today. Today we're talking about a Google product. And would you do me a favor and tell us what the product is that you wrote a book about?
Looker Studio is a data visualization tool. So, like any other tools, it's just a tool, but to create compelling data stories, you need to understand how to use that tool and also some basic understanding of what data storytelling is, what are its components, and basic design principles.
Right.
So
And we're gonna find out about that. Let's first though come back just to that word, the pair of words, Looker Studio. So I'm sure there's some listeners here who may know it by its former name.
Yeah, which is Data Studio. I think just a few months ago, to be precise, in October, that's when Google rebranded Data Studio to Looker Studio.
Right,
So
October of 2022.
Yes, that's right, October 2022, as part of Google Cloud Next. They rebranded the whole the business intelligence portfolio of Google Cloud, under which the products Looker, which is the enterprise business intelligence tool, and Data Studio also the combined together as a business intelligence portfolio.
Yes.
And Looker Studio has now two versions: the free Looker Studio and also the Pro Looker Studio.
Okay, and what are we going to be concerning ourselves with on this talk?
Mostly with the free Looker Studio, because when I wrote the book, it's only the free version that was available, and is for the pro version, we are yet to know a lot of things that what features will be added into. There were a few differences or new features that were added or announced back in October, but I assume that there is more coming in under the pro version.
Right, and what I will say is that as of time of this recording and of publication of your book, the feature set, I believe, would be more than sufficient for the small and medium businesses and marketers within both brands and agencies that are hearing this podcast.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about the way that Google Looker Studio is arranged. There's a couple of names that we just need to make sure that we understand their elements, and you even included a very small little diagram that showed arrows moving between the three items basically that we need. I'll tip off one of them. So we have something called a connector. So that connector is something that allows the main part of Looker Studio that we have to go and connect to the most important things that we will be accessing. So can you just take us through what those pieces are?
Yes. Is a connector is that piece of software that connects to your underlying data set. So a data set could be a Google Analytics system that stores the data, or it could be a Google Sheet, like where you have a small set of data. And you need a connector to connect to that data set so that within Looker Studio, a data source is created. A data source is a logical representation of that data set where you will find the list of all the fields, its data types, and some metadata about that data set. And from the data source is where you can create your visualizations within the reports. So the core components of Looker Studio are the connector and connecting to the data set, the data
Yes.
source, and the
Yes.
report.
Yes. So the reason why, okay, we have a report and it's connecting back to a data source. If I were to water this down to the system most of us have used before we go to Looker Studio, let's take Google Sheets, right? Some sort of spreadsheet. So if I have a tab that has my chart on it, and that chart is pulling data out of another tab that just has rows and columns of data on it. There I have my report and I have my data source. Now, the only thing that I don't have there, because it's already sitting inside of the self-same spreadsheet, is there's no connector. So all we have to do is imagine that there is this, as you called it, a piece of software that does sit between the thing that makes the chart and the place where the data is, and it's going to facilitate that. Basically, to non-technical people like me, it just happens magically.
Yes, totally.
Um, and I suppose the other thing, because there can be multiple connectors, a kind of important point here is that if we think about the type of data that we're getting, you mentioned Google Analytics. So we may have multiple connectors because where that Google Analytics data is residing may be different. So would I be right? An example might be there is a native connector. So I'm looking straight from my Google Looker Studio to my Google Analytics records. But then if I used BigQuery and I had exported the data from Google Analytics into BigQuery, then I have a different connector that points to BigQuery. Is that how it works?
Yes, exactly. So the connector speaks the language of the source. So that's why you need to use different connectors to connect to different data storage systems.
So I'm going to, again, play devil's advocate here. So for the people who are maybe still doing things on a spreadsheet, wondering why they would take on this additional complexity, can you explain why Looker Studio is such a superior way to have ongoing visualizations compared to something static like a chart inside of a spreadsheet?
Sure. So in Looker Studio, there are a lot more options. You can build a range of uh, different chart types that are available to you. And not only that, the configurations that are available to you are much more broader as you compared with the options that you have within Sheets, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. So basically, the breadth of features is the main difference here.
Yes.
And the other is you can continuously refresh data, right? So automatically, once you connect the data source to the underlying data set, which is the Google Sheet here, as and when you add more data to the same sheet, so the charts will be automatically refreshed within Looker Studio.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if there were anything I would add to that, it would be that not only is it refreshable, but it's repeatable. If I had, let's say, one division of my company and I make a visualization that works with that data set, because I've trained Looker Studio on what that data set is like, if I have another data set somewhere else, I can just pick up that report and reuse it with uh, the same kind of data set, but using actual different data. So I have scale.
Sure, definitely. And another piece is also about collaboration. So with Looker Studio reports, you can have multiple users collaborating pretty easily and seamlessly within the same report, and also the ability to share both the data source and also report separately with
Right.
different users. What that means is you can have a single data source and create multiple reports out of it.
Yeah.
So back in the sheet, it's just a sheet. It just lives inside the sheet, and you
Yeah.
cannot, just reuse it in a different sheet unless you copy or import that data and so on. But what Looker Studio allows you to do is basically be able to create multiple reports and not just one person. You can share that with your team and colleagues so that everyone can use the same data source connection and to create multiple reports. And as you mentioned, yes, even for the same report where you have all the user interface beautiful charts created, and you want to just change the backend data, just a different address to the sheet, and you can also do that pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about some of the extra things where we can flex and go beyond what is possible with a spreadsheet. Um, we can start to make Looker Studio aware of which data it will be grouping things by. Um, it always knows, of course, how to count things. So if we have a metric like visits to a website, it always knows how to, do our standard math operations to that. But we can also train it that, for example, months of a year are
Mhm.
groupable. So if I wanted to see this month of this year compared to this same month a year ago, I can do things like that. I can take even different people's names or geography, regions, and I can use them. But I have to get my head wrapped around something that databases use for doing that, right? They can't just be metrics like a string of numbers. I have to treat those differently. What am I doing to those?
In Looker Studio, when you connect to the underlying data set and look at your data source, which is the logical representation of your data set, you see all the list of the fields. When you look at those fields, you can see that all those fields are identified as dimensions. Okay. So just hold that thought for a moment, and then you will see that an automatic metric is created by default, which is called record count. That means each data set will have like number of records, and if you just want to count the number of records for each slice of a dimension that you're looking at, for example, products, and then you can just use that default. So every data source will have that record count by default. But when you create a dashboard or when you create a chart, so you don't always want to look at the data at the most granular level. You always want to aggregate it. So given that the data source only has dimensions, but how do you configure a chart to aggregate the fields as metrics? So in Looker Studio's parlance, a metric is an aggregation. The result of an aggregation is a metric. So that's why in the data source, all the fields are dimensions because they are not aggregated yet. Okay. So record count is only the metric which is aggregated at that point. But when you come to the report design interface and you are creating a chart, you will see that you have the configurations for dimension and metric. Let's take the example of product and sales. So you want to look at sales. So you have the sales as a dimension field available in your data source that is visible to you within the report designer interface towards the right. So you can just drag and drop into your canvas. That will give you the overall sales number, which is aggregated by sum. So how does it know that it has to sum up and not perform any other aggregation? That's what is defined within the data source. So in the data source for each field, you can determine what is the default aggregation. So by default, all the numerical ones will get the aggregation of sum. So Looker Studio makes it easy for you. So to just get started, you don't have to define all these things before you can build your first chart because the defaults are good enough and they're intelligent enough that it knows that if it is a number, just sum it up. Okay, if you don't want to sum it up and instead you want to find average sales, then you can always change it.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay,
This is
and then yeah, in the chart, yeah, so then you drag and drop sales and then you drag and drop product onto the dimension because you want to break down that sales by product and you want to see the sales numbers for each product. So that's what it means by dimension and metric. Dimension is not aggregated, so metric is whatever is aggregated. It could be counts as well because if you want to get number of products, the counting the number of products, distinct products, is a metric. Count distinct of a product is a metric, but the product itself is a dimension.
right. So, yeah, at its very basic, as you say, we're getting things unaggregated. And when we look at it on our canvas and say, that's not the way I want it, what you're telling us to do is to look over, and for people who've seen the Looker Studio interface, it's on the right hand side. It's like a side panel. And you go and you start to adjust what each of those fields is for. And you will see on your main canvas what that change has resulted in. The takeaway for me is that you should just start by, as you said, just dragging something on to the page. You will make your report by iterating off of what you're seeing. It is what you see is what you get, which is great. I've sat for years alongside programmers, and they will work on their code, and I'm saying, well, what does it actually look like when you make it? Oh, no, I have to compile it. I can't just see that right away. Well, this you can. You see it right on the same screen, and you simply need to tweak what you're looking at on the right to make what you're looking at on the center part of the screen the way you want it.
Yep, it's an interactive tool.
Uh, you put it way more succinctly than I did. When we're making these changes, we can run along and start setting up dimensions, but I think this is a little bit of why you wrote the book as you did. And right within the title of the book, you say that we are doing data storytelling. Data storytelling. So, I think it's good for us maybe to pause as we've got something up on our canvas. You would want to remind us, if you were sitting beside us as we're doing this, you would probably want to say to us, but there is an objective to be served here. You're not just trying to slam all the data that you can into what will fit on this canvas. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. Working with data can have one of two different goals. One is exploratory. That means you just want to explore the data, understand what it is, what are the different fields, how does it look like, or maybe you have a one-time question that you need answer to. Just I just need to understand the sales of product X. That's it, nothing else. Maybe you can do a quick chart, put a scorecard or maybe bar chart, whatever that can give you that answer. So that is exploratory data analysis. The other part is you have a problem, you have an objective. You want to either create a report with static data, that means the data that doesn't change on a regular basis, that's static, and you want to just present insights like, this is the sales from our past year, and these are the insights or these are the findings from that data is what you want to present. That's your objective. You want to create a report, or maybe you want to monitor key performance indicators or metrics on a regular basis to understand the health and performance of your sales organization or marketing campaigns or whatever. So that means, yes, so there are different goals. First, you need to understand why do you even want to look at the data? What do you want the data to tell you? So that's why I kind of proposed a structured approach whenever you want to build something with data. It is the 3D approach. Call it like determine, design, and develop. Notice that the develop is the last stage here, not the first, because often I find that these tools are so shiny and make it very easy to build charts and play with data that we want to jump into create those beautiful reports and dashboards. But if you want that dashboard to be actually useful and impactful, then you need to spend time on the first two stages first. Like the determine is where you determine the objectives and goals of that report or dashboard. What do you want to find out from this? So, what are the questions you're trying to answer, and who is it serving? Like, who are the target audience, and what kind of data do you need? So, for financial performance, for example, you would need revenue data, you would need cost data, um, and so on. So you need to figure out, like, depending on your objectives, what kind of data, like big buckets of data that you would need. And then you come to the design phase. Maybe we'll talk more in the next few moments. The design phase is when you figure out the how to design, how does this report or dashboard should look like. And then once you create that or put those ideas into a kind of a wireframe, and only then you start developing.
Uh, yes, and this can be short. I mean, I think someone inside of a minute or two for something simple would be able to walk through these steps, but it is important to get them. If I were to think of determine, design, and develop, if I likened it to taking a road trip somewhere, even I'm going for, let's say, a picnic, I want to make sure that I have what I need with me before I get into the car and go. Um, so, and we'll talk in a little bit about all the wonderful chart types that there are in um, Looker Studio, but those we should hold off until we first determine what it is that we're trying to explain. Um, there may be, for example, a chart type that Looker Studio can I can use it in my design, but if I did not determine the data that I would need to render in that kind of a chart or to tell, period, um, I may find that I can't make that chart. So, as you say, I have to first figure out what it is I'm truly using as my objective for this visualization, find the accompanying data, and then move stepwise into the future phases. Have I got that right?
Yes, one more point is that while choosing the charts, you don't go from the end in mind yet, because the the type of chart that you would choose should be guided by the type of question you're trying to answer. For
Can you
example,
give an
yeah,
example?
yes. um, Say you want to find out trends, okay? but you have your eyes set on this bar charts, and you want to build a bar chart, but the question you're trying to answer is, trend of sales by like month and quarter, and you want to drill down and do all that stuff. So while it is technically possible that you can build a bar chart with, you know, time on the axis, but that's not the right way. And you're limiting yourself by just trying to fit that into a bar chart. So it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole kind of thing. It's not the ideal choice of the chart. So you choose charts based on the questions that you're trying to answer and the data points. Like again, for comparisons, are you making a comparison? Or you trying to find a distributions or scatter plots? Only then you would need a scatter plot. Or you just want to showcase the KPI or key performance metric, or whether something is good or bad. So you want to compare it with a goal, then you may want to use a bullet chart, for example. So as I said, like, if you already have set your mind on certain chart types, then it becomes really difficult to to achieve the objectives of that report or dashboard.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose the better way to represent what I was saying is that there are some charts though that are adjacent to each other. It's like they're clustered together. They're very similar. So
Mhm.
if I wanted to, and I don't want to lose this point, it is possible in Looker Studio with a single click to move from, let's say, a line to an area chart. Those are very easy. But if I'm trying to move from uh, those types of charts over to a completely different chart or visualization that is meant for something different, it has a different purpose, then I shouldn't imagine that I've already got the data that I need for it. So that's why your three-step approach is the better way to go here. Yes, we still have flexibility even after we've gotten all the way into our canvas on making changes to types and styles. But we really must do it in the logical order that you outlined. Can you tell us just a tiny bit about how, even when we are designing a chart, how we can build in interactivity, how we can try to put ourselves in the reader's, seat and give them some ways to filter or drill into what we're going to present them with. It's not just a flat sheet of paper that we're giving them.
Yes, you use the right words there: filter and then drill, right? So those are the forms of interactivity that you can easily build into the charts in Looker Studio. Let's first talk about the cross filtering. That means, say you have like four different charts on the report page, and one is a bar chart, the other is a line chart, something else, a pie chart, and another bar chart, for example. By selecting a piece of data in one of the charts that you want to see the rest of the charts reflecting that data. That means the first chart is breaking down sales by products, and the others charts don't have product depicted at all. They're just showing the cost information, or conversions or other metrics. But by just clicking on one of the products in one bar chart, you can quickly see how the cost and the conversions in the other charts are for that selected product. So that means you're having one chart filter the other charts. So there is no other additional filter in there. So it's so intuitive, because you see a chart and you just want to poke around, right? You want to click there and you want to click here and see only this piece of data, this slice of data, and while all the other charts will also get filtered automatically. So this cross filtering is again another design default for Looker Studio. That's why I said, like, Looker Studio helps you build visuals with good design principles at the get go. For the most part, you can't go wrong. because it was funny while I was writing the book and was trying to showcase an example of difference between a badly designed chart versus a well-designed chart. And I had to really go out of my way, or in some cases, I even found it impossible to create bad charts in Looker Studio. For example, think about 3D charts. You can't find 3D charts. I know there's a lot of literature out there that says like don't use 3D charts. I know there's occlusion and all
Or
that.
drop shadows or reflections. Yeah.
Yeah. So no complexity here. So you don't even have that option. So you can't go wrong choosing any decent chart in Looker
Okay.
Studio.
But it is just a tool, and it's a very good one. But let's just dwell on that point of how the design matters. And for any who are playing around with Looker Studio, what Sireesha is talking about is look into the Style tab as opposed to the Data tab, and you'll see all of the options that Sireesha is talking about. But you say in one point, visuals are critical, but they're only one component of data storytelling. Data storytelling embeds data visuals in a narrative and presents a cohesive picture. So while you're telling us that this tool makes things easy, that sounded to me like our job just got a little harder. Uh, would you maybe tell us what is it that we, as the person designing on this canvas, has to be mindful of if we're going to bring what we're making up from just being visual to being a good story? I mean, it can look good, but not something doesn't necessarily tell a story just because it looks good. Tell us what that extra bit is.
Yeah. So a data story needs three things. One is data. We all agree on that. So, and data is on you. The quality of the data that you bring to the report
Of
is
course.
on you. So it has to be fixed outside of Looker Studio.
Yep.
And the second is good visual design. So the right chart for the right question, and the right way to use colors, and the right way to organize content. And the last piece is the narrative. Narrative is the one which again you have to add to the components. So Looker Studio is again a data visualization tool. It's not a data storytelling tool because it's we who tell the stories using visuals. So the way you add narrative is when you have a clear idea about your objectives, and that's where the 3D approach will help you
Okay.
to craft that narrative. So you have to be really clear about the objectives and the goals and the target audience, what are they interested in,
Yep.
and then add design elements in terms of right visuals, right interactivity, maybe annotations. Some you can add some design components like lines or boxes, whatever brings the insights um, from the data, like it elevates that insights rather than just make it look busy.
Hmm.
So that's the visual design. Design doesn't mean that you try to apply everything that you learn about into your dashboard, but
Right.
it's only about trying to do what applies to your objective at hand. That's why the first determine stage is very, very important.
Yeah. And what drove
And
it home for me was when you showed a canvas and it was just a crude wireframe. You weren't even on the actual Looker Studio canvas, but it used the 5 W's that we often go, who, what, when, where, why, how as well. But you framed it like that, where if we're saying, all right, how did we do last quarter? Or where are the greatest sources of growth and the sources of stagnation coming from? That is now the opening of a story because I can put certain pieces of data in corners of this canvas that start to flesh that out like we would flesh out a character and a plot and setting in a story, right?
that's right. So I explained in the first chapter that stories can be of two different structures, right? Tops down or bottoms up. So, like the traditional type of story is where you build up to some critical event and then you get to the climax. which usually doesn't happen in dashboards, but you can build such kind of data narratives on your own in other tools, or even in just slide presentations, because you control each and every point of what to present. And also, I always believe that best data stories can be told with the data that is static. But if you're building a dashboard where you want to monitor the performance on a regular basis, you don't know how the data will be 1 week from now, or even how it looks tomorrow, so that you can't really make those aha moments right
Uh-huh.
away within the dynamic dashboard. But there is a structure that you can follow which can provide the context for the users to glean those insights. So the typical organization that I follow is, the first thing you want to understand is a metric. What is the thing that you want to understand about, campaign performance? But how do you measure campaign performance? So, and whether, how do you determine whether it is good or bad,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
So that
And
is the
you have
KPI,
to give
and
that
that goes on
context,
top.
right?
Yeah, so that goes on the top. So that's the important thing, that for whenever you open the dashboard, you want to understand whether it's speeding or not, right? So that means you need to understand whether it is good or bad, or your gas is empty. So you need that visual cues, and you want to see it first. Okay, it's bad. If it is good, yeah, you don't have to look at the rest of the dashboard. But if it is bad and it's in red, then you want to understand why. Okay, so the conversions are low compared to the previous week or previous month. Then why? And then you look at the traffic, and maybe one of the channels you're not getting as much traffic as you were getting before, and that contributed to the lack of performance or decrease in the performance. So that's how you build the narrative. So you start with the most important thing, the KPIs on the top, and add explanatory visuals in the bottom to give the context.
Right. And the way, that's a perfect way to bring us back to uh, dimensions. For anybody who is still hazy on that, what Sireesha just said, we're looking at conversions by channel. Anytime we use the word by, we're normally following it with the dimension that we're dividing our data into. So, right? And so, first question in the story is, how is our entity doing? Oh, our entity is not doing well on conversions. Oh, why? Well, this dimension, this one channel here, is underperforming. Okay. And then the next parts of the story can be told with, okay, well, what can be done to remedy this, or what are we going to try and do in the next period? So this is what we mean by carrying it into stories. And there's a few other things that I believe make Looker Studio better than slide presentations ever were in how to do this. But before we get into those, we're going to take a quick pause. I'm taking a moment to talk about the new Google Analytics. In early 2023, the in-person GA Fast Forward workshops will happen in Ottawa, Kingston, Montreal, as well as across upstate New York. You can go now and see registration details or get notified when it's happening in your area. Just go to gafastforward.com, spelled as you'd say it, or GAFast, the number 4, then WARD. Let's get back to the conversation. So, Sireesha, I wanted to just finish on the thought about how we can use Looker Studio as if we are showing slides, and we can even encourage the recipient of a report to move through different slides, as it were. Can you tell us how we do that in Looker Studio?
Yeah, so in a Looker Studio report, you can add multiple pages. That means you're controlling the narrative right there. So you're deciding what to show on page one, and and what to present in the subsequent pages, so that you are taking the user through a journey from page 1 through page 10, for example. So that way you can basically tell a narrative that is interesting and engaging to the users.
Yeah,
One way to
and
do that is, yeah, just want to add that one way to do that is you provide the overview on the first page.
of course,
So these are the key points. Okay, just there are no surprises here, because if you don't get to the point, you will lose the audience, especially the business audience. So
right.
you get to the main point, and in the subsequent pages, that's where you add more evidence, more detail, and context. And by logically grouping different themes related to those important metrics or the questions.
Yeah, I will say, as a person who uses it, that I try to attune myself as I'm making pages by the way that I would be presenting this as if I were standing in front of that person. What words am I using? And I often, even if they're long or they don't necessarily fit right away, I will go up to the top of every page, and it's the simplest field of all of them. It's a text field, but I just add title text, and it's speaking the way I would speak. And then I find that the charts that I'm able to put on the page fit around that. And of course, I edit it. But I have to tell you, there have been times where I've spent more time worrying about the title text than it's taken me to put together the charts on the page. And this is, I think, why data storytelling is uh, it we ignore it at our peril. It's an important thing that, especially because many of us are working remotely and we're trying to guide people into data when we are not there showing it to them. This is what we really have to focus on in marketing or in any other profession where we're showing data. We've got to carry that along. We've got to make sure that it doesn't get stripped off as we're just delivering a mass of data to our reader.
Right. It won't be used by anyone, if it doesn't align with the problem.
Yeah, it's a highly important part. Let's talk for a brief moment about how we have to be mindful of the way that reports actually draw data, and the fact that we don't want to make reports work too hard. We want to have optimal uh, usage of our reports. We don't want high latency. So, can you tell us a few things about what we have to watch for there?
Sure. In Looker Studio, when you add any component, like a chart that interacts with data, each component, each chart sends a different query back to the data set. So the data is always queried from your underlying data fresh. Of course, there is cache involved and you can control that, but still, for any changes in the way that you look at the data, for slices and dices, filters, and whatever minor changes, all those are separate queries. And when you put 30 different things on a single page, that means there are 30 different queries that are going back to the data set. And it makes the report or report page load slow, and it also depends on how fast your underlying data set is as well. If it is a powerful database like the BigQuery, oh yeah, it can handle enough load. But if it is sheets and you're sending like tens of queries back to it, it might choke a little bit. And one more thing is also the amount of data that comes back from those queries. The volume of data, you are retrieving huge volumes of data for all these charts that can also slow down the report. So what you need to worry about is, for example, your underlying data is at the second level. Let's say Google Analytics or any other data source which has like transactional level data, which has the granularity of each second. But in your report, the lowest granularity that you are visualizing any data is a day or even a week.
Or a quarter or a year.
Yeah, in that case, if you just directly connect to the data set, you are actually bringing in all that volume of data into Looker Studio and then aggregating it at the daily level. So instead of doing that, since you're anyway not interested in any granularity lower than the daily level, you may want to pre-aggregate that data in your data set outside of Looker Studio. And that's where databases like BigQuery come in handy, so that you can create aggregations there, so that you don't have to do the heavy lifting within Looker Studio, because it's not the right tool to do the heavy lifting.
Yes. Now, there are choices given. For example, if we wanted to make a average number or do something that is um, well suited for the amount of data we're pulling across, we have things like calculated fields that we can use. There's even parameters, but we must know that they bring a little bit of a load. Um, and as you say on the other side, if we're bringing data as if it were coming out of a fire hose out of our other source, that's also a load. And what it's coming across as may be a metered connection. So we're recording this in early 2023, and a hot topic in the marketing sphere is how the Google Analytics API quota hits its limit quite quickly with people who are just natively connecting to it from Looker Studio. I don't know if you have any comment about that, but I think the comment that I would take out of your book that applies to that is it's a good practice to limit data at the data source level itself to ensure report queries won't retrieve large result sets inadvertently, right? So you only use what you need.
That's right. So, as I understand, when I wrote the book, Google Analytics, when you connect to the Google Analytics source, by default, you're limited to only the last 28 days of data. Of course, you can increase that, but as I said, Looker Studio has good defaults that help you build good dashboards without you having to manage a lot of stuff. So by default, it's 28 days. So you're not really overloading it unless you actually increase that date range and get much more data, and then the report crashes.
One of the further ways of looking at this is that um, the tool itself, while it can be completely drag and drop, for some of the manipulations that you're talking about, and indeed that you show in the book, we need to start using a little bit of code. So it can use things like standard query language to ping a data source and bring back data, as it were. I don't think the point of the book is that people have to go out and learn SQL. One of the good parts, though, of Looker, by having that extensibility, to me, is that if I've started to use Looker as my tool of choice for making visualizations, and we need to get into some of these more advanced areas of manipulation or querying, that I can still keep the tool. Now, I may get out of the chair and allow a coder to come sit in the chair, or a data analyst, and they may have to take care of that part, but we don't have to leave the tool and upgrade to something beefier. It will still do what we need. It's just those parts of the tool aren't exposed to us if we don't need them to be.
Totally. So the only coding part that I can see is for calculated fields, which is not really code. Those are just expressions, and there are a lot of functions that are available that you use to
Very similar
create.
to formulas in a
Yeah,
spreadsheet.
exactly. So that's one small piece of coding. The other piece is a structured query language that you mentioned, which is applicable when connecting to the data sets which are SQL based, like BigQuery.
Right.
So you can
Excellent point.
communicate to them through writing SQL, like select this data from this bunch of tables. But
Right.
it's not compulsory. You can directly connect to a table without having to write a SQL query in the connector.
Yep. Yep. Very good point. Um, the There are 4 chapters near the end of the book, and can't leave this discussion without mentioning them, because you want to provide people with a way for them to get impressive looking dashboards, um, and to help them see what else is possible. Um, I mean, there's a lot that even people who don't use your book can go and find if they want to look in the community gallery of different visualization templates. But you did go into actual step-by-step instructions in these 4 chapters. The one I enjoyed particularly was a churn analysis. So a marketer would certainly get value out of that. Can you tell me, did you feel that you needed to go that deep into, having someone follow line by line your instructions and building their own? Is that because you feel Looker Studio really is a tool that there's no better way to learn it than to just get hands-on?
I feel that to learn any tool, hands on is the best way. Because otherwise, what it would be like is just going through documentation or abstract examples that you're not related to, anyways, to understand the myriad features. There are so many features, and you may not need all those features right away that the tool provides. So, having a problem at hand and getting hands on with the tool is the best way to learn any tool. And my intention in providing those examples is to take the readers through the journey of the 3D approach, and also the thought process that's involved in all those decisions and considerations that are made throughout these 3 stages, because that's not what you always get everywhere, but it's the practical approach that you need to apply if you want to build a compelling dashboard. So you can also see from those examples that it may not always be linear. It's just a guidance. It doesn't mean that once you are past the design phase, you can't make any design changes and you have to develop exactly the way the wireframe is. No, but you need to develop keeping in mind the the design decisions. You go through a series of questions and considerations in order to determine the right color schemes, for example, or the right interaction levels, or the right calculator fields or metrics, and so on. So there is a lot of thinking that goes into those design considerations. So you can't dismiss them either. So you have to develop keeping those in mind. And as you develop, you may uncover, for example, okay, so I have to present this here, but I need this field to show slightly different format or different data. That means maybe I need a new calculator field which I didn't foresee in the design phase. Okay, go ahead. As long as you stay true to the objectives of the dashboard and keep your end users in the loop, then you are flexible to make changes as you go along.
Yeah, I have to agree. You are actually helping us condense the parts that you must put in a certain way, so that we can get to results. So you even provide, for example, the data sets. We can download those from an online source and follow the instructions. Um, but to stay true with what storytelling is, we can deviate where our own circumstances, the audience that we know that we're going to talk to, calls for something different, and we can get creative in those steps. So I like how you've kind of said this is definitely going to work, but as you're going through this, if you want to make adjustments, here are some things that you can change up, and you're not going to it's not going to break. You're still going to get to an end result, and you're going to do it quickly enough that you can learn how for next time to even get a little bit more freestyle, maybe even have fewer steps, or provide people with things faster than they would ever have expected. This has been a great talk, Sireesha, and for people who are interested in the book, interested in following you and what you do, where would you send them?
LinkedIn. So I'm active on LinkedIn, and everyone can find me on LinkedIn.
All right, that's awesome. And the name of the book once more is?
Data storytelling with Google Looker Studio.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
I'm very grateful to have, and I know that people will have left with some new insights on how they can make their marketing even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.